We're joined right now by former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani. Thank you so much for joining us. And they were weighing whether to push through these federal charges. What factors went into this decision, Neama?
Well, Andy, there's the legal factors and the political ones, and I'll start with the legal. North Carolina really has a de facto moratorium on the death penalty. It's still on the books, but state law requires a physician to be present, and the North Carolina Medical Board doesn't allow its physicians to oversee executions. So, as a practical matter, they haven't had an execution in North Carolina for quite some time, almost 2 decades now. So, obviously, the federal system is different, and we've seen it in cases such as the case we talked about last week, the Vermont case where a cult member killed a Border Patrol agent, or probably more famously, though, Luigi Mangione, who killed the United Healthcare CEO in New York. Neither of those states have the death penalty, and you have seen the Department of Justice filing over the state to try to put someone to death. And I think that's what we're going to see in this case, because you have the legal considerations. And obviously, the video is very powerful. Every murder is horrific and not justifiable, but this one is particularly savage and senseless when you see it. And of course, you have the political layer on top of it. When the president, the White House press secretary is talking about it, I can't help but notice there's a racial component. You have a black man killing a white woman. Obviously, we have issues of federal law enforcement in Democratic run cities and the back and forth with the Supreme Court potentially weighing in on that. They weighed on some immigration issues as recently as yesterday. So you have law and you have politics, and they're intersecting here. And I really do believe that the Department of Justice is going to seek the death penalty in this case.
And we'll get into that sentence in just a little bit, but you mentioned the key factor of this case, that the video evidence, and it came out just recently from this light rail train in Charlotte, North Carolina. This crime, this killing happened at the end of August, and it wasn't really talked about, especially in national circles. How important is this video in terms of moving this not only from a state crime to a federal crime?
Video is everything. We saw it, for instance, with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. But back when I was younger, at least, you rarely have video of crimes. I mean, Rodney King was one of the most famous examples. But now, with surveillance video everywhere and everyone having a video camera on their cell phone, we are seeing much, much more video. And that's what makes this case so powerful. It doesn't really change the facts, but everyone who's watching, seeing this completely senseless, heinous, horrific, violent video. I mean, it just shocks the conscience. And of course, everyone's talking about Brown's criminal history, which is extensive. Most serious being that armed robbery with a firearm. Now, I know his lawyers are going to try to point to some mental health issues to try to keep him alive. Apparently, he said he had metal objects or something controlling his body during one of his court hearings. So we're going to see what the defense does in this case to try to keep Brown alive.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm not going to show the video anymore because it's just so very difficult to watch time and time again. Obviously, the killing of this Ukrainian refugee, and you kind of imagine what she was going through to leave the war-torn home country to seek a better life here in the United States. You mentioned that they will likely try to seek the death penalty. How much will that mental health aspect, though, key in on this? How will the defense try to avoid the death penalty due to that mental health issues?
I think that's going to be the entire defense in this case. If you are a death penalty qualified lawyer, your entire job is to keep your client alive. And there's no question that Brown did this, and there's no legal or moral justification here. You can't argue self-defense, can't argue lack of intent. There's no real defense in this case. You can just argue mitigation at sentencing to try to keep him alive. It reminds me of for instance, the Parkland school shooter case, Nicholas Cruz. Again, no real defense there, but what the lawyers did is they pleaded guilty to all those counts of murder and the worst school shooting at the time in American history to try to keep their client alive. And ultimately, they were successful. Even Brian Koberger recently, again, pleaded to a life sentence. So I expect to see mitigation in this case. I'm not saying it's going to carry today, but that's the only possible thing you can do if you are a defense lawyer defending Carlos Brown here.
Of course, and we're also hearing from Pam Bondi saying you'll spend life behind bars, but there's also this conversation around all the mugshots, all the previous arrests of Decarlos Brown. You can just see all these, the run-ins with the law time and time again for all sorts of different crimes. In terms of the sentencing for this, will that up the sentence at all? It may not matter, but what does that factor in, the fact that he has had so many run-ins with law enforcement prior?
Well, Andy, it's certainly an aggravating factor. And I think the best case scenario for him is life without the possibility of parole. Obviously, this is a first degree premeditated murder. It's not going to be manslaughter. It's not going to be second degree. It's not going to be crime of passion or someone acting recklessly or criminally negligently. This was premeditated. This was intentional. This is murder. And under the federal sentencing guidelines and federal law, because it occurred on a mass transit system, it will be a mandatory life sentence. Really, the only question is, will Brown face the death penalty and will he end up on death row and be executed?
And there's so much criticism about how this individual, how this person could not be behind bars, but on that train that night. A representative from North Carolina, Tim Moore, posting this, saying, I led a letter calling for the removal of the judge who released a 14-time offender who went on to murder Irina Zarutska in Charlotte. This tragedy was preventable. There must be accountability. North Carolinians deserve better. Is there any legal precedent potentially for that, to have an individual like a judge held liable for a crime committed by this individual?
Judges can't be held liable, but they can be removed. And obviously, there's a lot of criticism here. And, what I would say is it's really a failure of our justice system. So I'm talking about prosecutors. I'm talking about judges. When you're talking about the mayor of Charlotte or members of Congress, I'm not saying they can't do their job and make sure that individuals have the right resources, but really, it's prosecutors, it's judges, it's their job to put individuals like this behind bars. There's not much other elected officials can do.
All right, very good. I just wanted to ask you about that. Neama, are we missing anything in terms of this case? It feels like obviously a horrific tragedy. Are we missing anything? Is there anything else that stands out for you?
What stands out to me, this is part of a broader trend. Historically, murder cases were handled by state prosecutors, district attorneys, county attorneys, attorney generals. But we're seeing the DOJ step in, and I'm a former federal prosecutor. And, back when I was one under an Obama U.S. attorney and a Bush U.S. attorney, you wouldn't see federal murder cases unless it was a terrorism case or an elected official or occurred on federal land. But now, because of the seeming gap where people believe, certainly folks in the Trump administration believe, that state and local prosecutors aren't doing their job, prosecute these cases, or certainly they're not prosecuting to the full extent that they can, you're going to see the feds step in and handle many more of these cases. Certainly in blue states where they don't have the death penalty, I'd expect to see a lot more federal murder cases, as Pam Bondi and her attorney general have promised the American people.
And just to go along with that thought, do you think there will be an increase in that, maybe not for murder cases like this, but with individuals that have been caught so many times, arrested so many times for different charges? Will the feds continue to step in that regard? Is that something that they might begin to do?
I think so. I think you're going to see more prosecution, certainly in the immigration context. We're already seeing that. Obviously, there are individuals who are going through civil immigration enforcement. They're being removed from the country. But if you've been removed and you come back to the United States, you can be prosecuted criminally. We're seeing an uptick in those. Obviously, we're seeing a significant increase in prosecution of assault on federal officers, different ICE agents. But in terms of violent crime, absolutely, even short of murder, I do expect, and I am seeing, significantly more federal prosecutions, particularly in big cities like Charlotte and elsewhere.
All right, and then obviously the burden continues to expand potentially for federal prosecutors like yourself. All right, Neama, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight here on Live Now.
Of course, Andy. Talk soon.
All right, thanks so much.